So let's talk a little bit about the entrance or the inner reality. You see, circumcision was a removal of the foreskin, and the Bible talks about the foreskin of the heart. The removal of the foreskin was an outward sign, but it pointed to an inner reality. And the inner reality that it pointed to was that people had now entered into the covenant because their old nature had been cut off. The cutting off of the foreskin was an outward sign of an inner reality, and that inner reality was the removal of the old nature and replacing the old nature with a new nature. Let's go to Romans chapter 4. Verse 11. Just to take a look at one slice of this verse that we focus our attention on with regard to justification, so that we're clear in our minds and that other people are clear that justification is by grace through faith, and it's not based on anything like the celebration of the sacraments. The celebration of the sacraments is important, but they are not the foundation of our justification. So how does Paul teach us that? In speaking of Abraham, he says, "And Abraham received circumcision as a sign and seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised." Now, when I grew up being taught that circumcision was not a spiritual thing, it was an ethnic thing. And circumcision demonstrated that you were part of the ethnic people of God. But that's all it was. It was just a badge, an external badge that you were an Israelite. Didn't say anything at all about any spiritual reality. But notice that Paul says that circumcision was a sign and seal of righteousness. He doesn't say it was a sign and seal of being an ethnic Israelite. He said it was a sign and seal of being a righteous person. But lest we think that the righteousness came from the circumcision, which it did not, he said that it was a sign and seal of righteousness that comes by faith. And how do we know that? Because Abram had come to faith and been declared righteous before he was circumcised. So that we can't possibly be confused that his righteousness came as a result of his circumcision. That wasn't the order. He believed, and he was declared righteous, and then he was given the sign of that righteousness that comes through faith, the sign of circumcision. So he says he's the father of all who believe but have not been circumcised. Here's the only thing that I will throw in as a little sidebar, which helped me a long time ago with regard to the question of do we baptize our babies or not. My big objection to that was, you can't baptize these babies because they haven't come to faith. And since they haven't come to faith, they haven't become righteous in God's eyes. And since they haven't come to faith and haven't been declared righteous, they can't have the sign of righteousness that comes by faith. Pretty straightforward argument, convinced me, and then I read Romans. Because it's clear that circumcision is a sign and seal of the righteousness that comes by faith. Now, for Abraham as an adult, the order was very clear. He believed. He was declared righteous. He received the sign of circumcision. So when you're pastoring a church and somebody believes and they're declared righteous, you administer baptism to them, just like Abram. But the Bible is also clear that God told Abram, this sign and seal is not only for you, this sign and seal is also for your children. 8 days old. Children who could not possibly have exercised faith, and through that faith been declared righteous. In other words, in God's economy, circumcision was a sign and seal, as is baptism, of a righteousness that comes through faith, but God's not caught up in the order. For adults who are coming to faith, the order is faith, righteousness, baptism. And then God says, and I want you to do the same thing for your children. Give them the sign of the righteousness that comes through faith. Now that's also important because another objection that I had to baptizing babies was, well, if you baptize babies, you just think they got it made in the shade. No, because now the whole process of discipling those children so that they come to an understanding of the faith, and they embrace that faith, and they have their own personal commitment to God. You see, but God says it's okay with me if the little ones get the sign, and then later on they get the faith and the righteousness. End of sidebar. My point being, what is my point? Yeah, my point being that circumcision was the entrance sacrament. It's entering into righteousness that comes through faith. And that Israel had to be righteous through faith before they entered the promised land. Because if they tried to enter the promised land without that righteousness through faith, they would have been just like the Canaanites. And so in the same way, baptism is the entrance sacrament into righteousness through faith. And so